This is the Evidence-Based Investing Podcast, the show that challenges assumptions and puts every strategy under the microscope. We bring in the experts, we bring the facts, and we break down what actually works depending on where you are in your wealth journey. If you want hype, this isn't your podcast. If you want the truth, well then welcome aboard. The information in this podcast is for educational purposes only and does not constitute financial, tax, or legal advice. We discuss general investment concepts and share case studies, but your personal situation may be different. Always consult a qualified financial advisor before making any investment decisions. Past performance is not indicative of future results.
Welcome to the Evidence-Based Investing Podcast. I'm your host, Luke Ryan. This is powered by Retain Property. We are going to go through a process over these first 8 episodes, uncovering exactly what us buyers agents do when we are buying investment properties borderless with a strategy of up to 30 years in the future. We will talk about how we do it here at Retain Property, but it will give you enough information to be able to go out and do it on your own if you have the time and the expertise to try and pull it off for yourself. I hope this is very educational. I'm sure that these next 8 episodes will be some of the most enlightening episodes of any podcast that you ever have listened to when it comes to building property portfolios borderless around Australia. The first episode that we're going to go through is we're going to be talking about deposit saving, delayed gratification. We're going to be talking about budgeting, the mindset that you need, and some of the tricks and tips you need. Now, this might be for your deposit for your first property, and in most cases it will be, but it's also about making sure that you structure your pay correctly so that when the banks are looking through your bank statements, that it is structured in a way that they like, that you look like you have a savings pattern. It's preparing for finance, but it's also goal setting. The second episode, we're going to go through building your A team. Now, this is a part of the puzzle that I see so many people get wrong. It's about making sure that your mortgage broker and your accountant, first of all, are on the same page. They work against each other unless they understand what your goal is. A mortgage broker, his job is to get you as much finance as you can, and the accountant's is to make sure you pay as little tax as possible. But they're working against each other, guys. If your income is dropping because you're claiming as much as you possibly can, that means the amount of money that the banks will give you will typically be less. Now, there's some caveats to that when it comes to depreciation where you can add it back, but for the most case, that is the scenario. So having those two people on board together in the same room, having a meeting before you go for your finance, or even 6 months before you do your books at the end of the year, is so important, guys. A buyer's agent should be pulling these two people together. It can be your current accountant and your current mortgage broker, or it can be ones that the buyer's agents recommend. The one thing that you need to get out of this is that they need to be on the same page. Now, you also need a team of other professionals. You need a conveyancer. That's a real obvious one. You need a property manager to be able to perform inspections for you, to get you a rental appraisal, to make sure that the property is up to rental minimum standards. And you need to have these people on your team when you are inspecting a property before you even buy it. You can't wait until you buy it, then do it, because you'll miss out some crucial pieces of the puzzle which can cost you tens of thousands of dollars. You need to know inspectors, whether it be building and pests. You need to know trades. You need builders for quotes, and you need conveyancers. You need handymen. You need all of those people, guys. They all have a role to play. Some are more important than others, but if you miss out one of them and you get it wrong, because we're playing in a game where properties are starting at $500,000 or $600,000 for a house these days and going up millions and millions of dollars, by not getting these crucial pieces right from the start will cost you a lot of money. So we'll give you a bit of a rundown of that, what's some red flags to look out for mortgage brokers and accountants, what you should expect to pay some of them or not pay them at all, and what they, how to structure that in the most advantageous way for yourself. Now, episode 3, we're going to jump into different structures that we see people buying property in. So we'll talk about trusts, companies, and we can talk about whether it's in your personal name. Now, I'm not an accountant and I'm not a financial planner. I can't give any personal advice on what structure people should buy in, but I can show you what I've seen my clients buy them in before and some of the positives and negatives that I see out of each vehicle. There's a lot of talk at the moment about trust lending. It doesn't work for everybody all the time, and depending on who you are, what you're trying to achieve, how much income you make, it might make sense for you, it might not. I want to talk about all the different lender options that are out there. Well, touch on the lender options that are out there. A lot of people think that there's only, the 4 big banks and a couple of Macquarie's and Bankwest, but there's actually a lot of non-bank lenders out there at the moment. I want to touch on how some of their servicing calculators work, buffers that they have to put in place, whether it be they've got to allow for high interest rates or less rent, and some of the legislation that the bigger banks have to abide by in comparison to the non-bank lenders, and loopholes with the trusts as well that seem to get people around them. I want to make sure that when we're talking about this, we're talking about actually building it out on paper, guys. We want to make sure that we're putting it into a piece of software where we can actually start putting scenarios in place. If I buy this property and it goes up in X amount in value in the first 2 years, in the 5 years, in the 3 years, how does that look like? When should I put a granny flat on? How much more cash flow will that create me? If that's inside of a trust, will that get to a point where it's neutrally geared? And will that unlock more borrowing capacity earlier or later? Should I do it on this house or this house first? What are my guardrails? If interest rates go up and down, how am I looking in 5 years? Am I running out of cash? Now, there is some amazing software out there nowadays that we build this out on, and when we do it with the mortgage broker and the accountant. We make sure we get that advice. We get the clients in the room and we do it all at once. That way you can get the tax advice, you can get the lending advice all at once, and you've got to make sure that you've got someone in there that understands property statistics, they understand the data and what correlates to capital growth and rental increases. It's all well and good looking at days on market in isolation, but it doesn't mean much if the affordability for the area is turned to crap or the vacancy rates are increasing and it looks like it's at the top of the cycle. There's a lot to it, and having somebody there that's an expert in it is crucial. The next thing that I'm going to talk about is the suburb research and shortlisting. This is where we actually dive a lot deeper into the correlation of the metrics and making sure that, for example, you buy property now and the mortgage broker says to us that in 3 years they'll be in a situation to have serviceability to buy another property and they have no other capital that they need. So we can say, righto, we need an area that's going to grow by 30%, for example, in the next 3 years, so that in 3 years they can pull out the equity, use that as deposit and cost to buy that next one. Okay, cool. What sort of suburbs is going to give us the highest probability of getting that 30%? And that's where having a person in the room that understands property cycles will be able to align the suburb that you want to get into to your personal circumstances. Now, the reason why you wouldn't just all push everybody into the same hotspot all the time is because it's all well and good if the property goes up 20% per year for the next 3 years, but if it starts dropping off after that, then the outcome for that situation where that client only needed to make 30% in 10 years might be better over a longer window. And I can explain this to you. So if this is a property price, right, and this is 10 years, so that's 10, that's 5 years, it's year 0, and then down here is, say, 500k, and up here is, say, 1.1 mil. If you buy a property, and let's just say that the mortgage broker says that this client will be in a position to be able to buy another property in 3 years. If you go and buy in a hotspot area and the property price chart goes up like this, what that means is that you've got the capital in 1.5 years, just here, right, to buy the next property. But if you don't have the serviceability, if the banks won't actually give you the rest of the money, then what was the point in getting that much money that quickly? You only needed the money here. Now, what would be better is, in an ideal world, we would buy a property that goes like this, right? Now, you might say, why? The reason is that at the 10-year mark, it made more money. You've got to hang on to it through a cycle. So typically if you get into an area that is looking like it's going to have exponential growth, it would be a more of a high-risk area, and it's the probability of that dropping down afterwards is going to be more than a area that's had a really stable chart of a long period of time, has a really diverse economy and all the rest of it. So we'll dive right into this and how the process goes from, actually looking at what your situation is from a finance point of view to when you can actually purchase, how much you can purchase, which will then outline the suburbs that you should be buying in the asset type class that you want to buy. So there's a lot to it rather than just going, everyone's buying in Townsville at the moment, let's go buy in Townsville. That's daft. I hate that thinking. So, okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is episode 5, which is where we're actually going to be researching the property. So once you've got your suburb shortlist, you need to then go and research properties. So this is where we're doing a bit of trying to get access to some off-market deals if we're in a hot area, so that we can get access to it without it being in a multi-offer situation with 20 different offers. I want to talk about the relationship with real estate agents and how important they are. I want to talk about some of the do's and don'ts with real estate agents. They have typically large egos, and you need to be able to treat them well. They are generally good people, but you've got to make sure that you're communicating with them. You've got to make sure that you're dealing with them in a professional manner. If you want respect from them, they demand respect from you, which is fair enough. Now, I'll also talk about negotiations. There's some tactics that are very obvious that they use time and time again, which is fine. Their fiduciary duty as a real estate selling agent is to do the best thing by their client. They don't have your best interests at heart. Buyers agents do. It's our fiduciary duty to do the best thing by our clients. So we want the price as low as possible, and we don't want to hide any possible issues with that property from our client, because that's our fiduciary duty. That's what we have to do. Real estate agents are different. If they can hide something and get away with it, they will. And if they can get the price up higher for their client, that's exactly what they're paid to be doing, right? As a buyer, you can't trust them as much as you can trust a buyer's agent 99 times out of 100. If you were the person selling the house, that's exactly what you would want from your real estate selling agent too. So you can't blame them. There's some auction bidding tactics that I might run through. Yeah, so that will be a really short but interesting episode. I think there'll be a lot of people that get a lot out of that. Episode number 6, we're going to talk about pre-due diligence. We're going to talk about how to go about getting a unbiased inspection. So just if you're buying on the other side of the country, just listening to what the real estate agent's got to say, relying on their photos, which are heavily edited, and relying on the videos that they take is not enough. There is a strategy around how to do this. It costs basically nothing, and you can actually get probably a better outcome than what most people would get by walking around the property themselves, because they're not qualified to do so. This is where we will utilize property managers, and there is a very nuanced way of going about doing this in a professional manner. We'll go over building and pest inspections, electrical inspections, plumbing inspections, some of the inspections that you need to get done before you go unconditional on a property, what clauses you can put into contracts, what clauses we recommend not putting into contracts, when they are a good idea, when they're not a good idea. There is a lot of thinking that goes around this to be able to negotiate on a property and get the best price without leaving yourself in a situation where you are opening yourself up to too much risk. We'll talk about due diligence. We'll talk about rental minimum standards. We'll talk about negotiating after a building and pest inspection, obtaining quotes in episode 7. So if you do go get a building and pest inspection, there's a major defect in most states around Australia that gives you the right to be able to pull out of the contract completely. So if you do find yourself in that situation, you don't necessarily just want to get out of it. You can actually negotiate. So you might say, righto, I'm going to go get 3 quotes. This is what it's going to cost me to build it. To fix it, I want that off the price, or I want you to fix it before we go unconditional. The next thing we're going to be talking about will be after actually buying the property. So increasing rental returns through value add strategies. This will be a really, really good one. Having a look at the floor plans. How can I add another bedroom? Does the backyard fit a granny flat? What are the rules in that area that state with that council in regards to getting a granny flat? Do I need to go through a development application process? Is it just a tick and flick type scenario where I know that I can put a granny flat on this property because it's not in this zone and it's X amount of meters from this wall and it's not over an easement, etc., etc. I'll run you through that, and I'll give you some strategies around what we do to increase both the rental return and the equity of properties. I'll talk about some different valuation methods that you can basically trick a bank into getting more equity, and some of the tactics that people use to artificially increase what their equity actually is. Talk about in-person valuations. I'll talk about desktop valuations and where the positives and negatives are for them. If you don't really know what's possible on the income that you are making, you don't understand how much finance you can get, and you don't understand what the ongoing costs are going to be for property, then this is going to give you a overview of exactly what is possible on different outcomes. I'm going to do my best to give examples throughout this next 8 episodes on people on different incomes at different rates, so that there'll be something that makes sense to you. I will change the names of my clients in order to protect their privacy, but I'll probably use real life examples in a lot of situations. I might use hypotheticals, and I will build out some hypothetical situations. And if you guys ever want to get a personalized experience with me to build it out for you exactly, then that is obviously something that we can do and something that we do. Now, when it comes to the first piece of the puzzle, today's episode, as I said, we're going to be talking about delayed gratification, so we can save for the deposit. Now, there's one thing article that I read the other day. People always talk about how it's harder to get into the property market than ever before, and then you have granddad that says, back in my day, I was paying 17% interest, right? Well, guys, there's one key difference that people don't understand, and this will be something that you can go back to shove it in your parents' face when they tell you this. The Australian dwelling value to income ratio has significantly worsened over the past 50 years, with the national average rising from approximately 3.4 in 1975 to about 8.2 in 2025. This means it now takes nearly 8.2 times the average annual income to afford an average home, compared to only 3.4 times 50 years ago. This dramatic increase is due to house prices rising much faster than incomes, creating a 50-year low in housing affordability. In other words, if you're on $100,000 now, the average property would be $820,000, which is 8.2 times what your average annual income is. But if they were on 100 grand in 1975, now obviously they weren't, there's inflation, but regardless, house prices have moved at a higher rate, and this will prove it to you. If they're on 100,000 in 1975, that means that the same house now, which would be paying $820,000 for, is only $340,000. So 17% interest rates on a $340,000 home is still a hell of a lot less than 6% at $820,000. Not to mention the principal that you need to pay off that property. Rewind that or send this episode to your dad next time he says something like that, because it was actually a lot less out of their pocket back then, even at the highest interest rates. So what I want to talk about is the asset class of residential property and why I like it so much. Because I think without the why, people aren't going to take the sacrifices that they need to take today to actually save for their first deposit. The power of property and why it's so good and why it has made more millionaires than any other asset class in the world is because of leverage. At the moment, at the time of shooting this podcast, there's a lot in the media about the 5% deposit scheme. So basically, you can buy a property at the moment with no lender's mortgage insurance, providing you're going to live in it, with a 5% deposit, and which means that if you're going to go and buy a $1 million property, for example, you only really need $50,000. Now, I would recommend saving up a bit more than that. There's probably some other little costs that might jump up and hit you, and you also want to have a little bit of a buffer there in case the hot water cylinder blows up the second day that you own the property. Let's just use that as an example. Now, the beauty of that is that the average Australian capital growth rate over the last 15 years has been 6.8% per year, according to REA. So that means you could spend $50,000 on a deposit to get you into $1 million asset at the moment. And if that grows in the first year at the Australian average of 6.8%, it will go up by $68,000 in value, which means your cash on cash return is over 100% in the first year. You won't get that in many other asset classes. When you talk about the share market, the chances that doubling in the first year certainly is not the Australian average. Sure, there's some that do it, there's some that outperform that, but it is much more risky. And especially when you talk about leverage. A lot of people say that you can't leverage shares. That's not true. You can. But if you go and put down a 5%, $50,000 to buy $1 million worth of shares, because it's a liquid asset, and the chart goes up and down every day, it will likely go down 5% at some point during that thing, which means you get liquidated. All of your $50,000 gets wiped off the table. It's a bit different in property. It doesn't go up and down every day like that. Banks don't go and ask for a valuation every day. And if you look at it for long enough, it will actually always sort of go up. So it's a lot safer for the banks. The reason why banks like lending money to consumers that are buying residential property is because they have that security there. If you default on the mortgage, they have the right to take it back. Generally, from what I've seen, if you are paying your mortgage, they'll let you keep going even if the property dips a little bit. Now, that's not to say that they can't take it off you, but if it's your own home, there is some laws around that certainly makes it hard for them. That's the beauty of leverage, right? That's why it's worth sacrificing now for the next 2, 3, 4 years to get yourself into down a deposit to be able to buy a property and get on the property ladder. They say that property doubles every 10 years. It doesn't quite on average, but it gets very close. Now, that means if you buy $1 million asset, that in the next 10 years, there's a very high probability that it will double, which means it will go to $2 million, depending on obviously where you buy in the cycle. On average, that's roughly what it's doing. Where it gets really interesting is compound growth, right? So it might go from $1 million to $2 million in the first 10 years. The next 10 years after that, it goes from $2 million to $4 million. And the next 10 years after that, it goes from $4 million to $8 million. So you can see that over 30 years, you might put down $50,000 and it could be worth $8 million in 30 years. So if you are listening to this and you're around 25, that means when you 55 years old, you could have $8 million. Now, obviously, it won't be the same buying power now as what it would be then because there is what's called inflation. But inflation typically sits at about 2.5% to 3%, and the Australian average capital growth rate is 6.8%, so it outperforms it massively. Okay, so now that I've talked about the why property investment is such a good tool and why you should actually sacrifice now to be able to get yourself into the property market, I've just talked about buying one property and it going from 1 to 2, 2 to 4, and 4 to $8 million in 30 years. If that's not enough to encourage you to knuckle down for a few years, then this probably ain't the podcast for you. But if you're still listening and you like the idea of being rich, then listen up. Look, guys, you need to, first of all, you need to audit your accounts. You need to have a look at what you're spending first and foremost. So how I went about this is that when you go into internet banking, you can usually just go through and export to CSV your spending, right? So go over the last 3 months or 6 months. You can usually put like a filter in there from this date to that date, export as CSV, and then open it up in Excel or Google Sheets. And then what I actually did is I added a couple columns, and I had one as discretionary and non-discretionary, right? So basically anything that was discretionary is stuff that I have to buy. So, like rent and electricity, water, groceries, fuel, etc. And then I had non-discretionary spendings, which was everything like going to the pub, going shopping, and anything like that, that you don't need, you can cut back on if you want to. Once I did that, I was already shocked at how much money I was wasting each week. And then I went through my discretionary as well. And one thing that I noticed at the time, I was spending $800 a week on rent. So I cut that right back. I moved in with a friend and got it down to $250 a week. That saving alone was absolutely huge. I understand that my situation is not the same as everybody else's. Some people have kids. Some people have got a baby at home. They haven't got a way to save this money at the moment, or they won't be able to get the same savings in one quick decision as what I did. But there's going to be other people that can. There's going to be other people that were actually spending more than what I would be. So, look, I don't know your personal situation, so you take out of it what you can. And if you're already doing it, well, then that's great too. First of all, audit what you need to keep, what you don't need to keep, and then out of what you thought you need to keep, can you cut it back? That will create your budget, right? What's in the discretionary savings area, discretionary spendings area after you've actually audited it is what you need to put into a bank account out of your pay each week for it to be on direct debits to then come out, right? That's fine. Get your pay, you put that amount of money into there, that's your fixed overheads. The next thing that you want to do is actually, I learned from a book that I read called Profit First. Basically, the first thing that you want to do is put away your savings. The reason why you do this and the reason why you do it like this is because of human nature. Basically, If you are in a situation where you have access to the money and you need to spend it on something, even if it is quite important, the easiest option is just to pull it out of your savings and to spend it. If you go and actually put it into a different bank account, which you don't have access to on your online banking, you can't access it easy and you can't transfer it easy, it's gone, it's out of sight, it's out of mind, right? And you need to get it to a point where you actually need to physically go into the bank to get that money out. Well, a lot of people do if you have got bad money management skills. Or I wouldn't even call it bad money management skills, I would just say that it's the average person these days. If you do that, you will actually find what happens is you got your pot of money that is your savings, from profit first, as they call it. You've got your pot of money, which is your discretional spending, so what you have left, and what's left after that is your non-discretional, right? So your money that you can spend on, eating out, food, fuel, fun, all that sort of stuff, right? Now, what you'll find is that if that amount of money that's sitting in there is low and you need more money, well, then you will work harder. And this is where actually getting a second job is really, really important, or just being more smart with your money, right? Buying groceries where you can save a little bit of money. But getting a second job is, a great way, obviously, to make some more money. But it also takes your mind off what you were going to be doing, like Saturday spending money as well. So you might make $300 at that new job, but you also save $100 on what you usually would have done on that Saturday anyway, whether it be going out for lunch or coffee with friends. So that's obviously a big win. Now, remember, guys, I'm not talking about working every Saturday for the rest of your life. Life will go in seasons. There'll be times where you need to knuckle down, you need to save, and there will be times where you are on the beach in Europe, going from one country to the next country every 3 days. I just recently did that. So buy the investment property first, do that second would be my advice. You'll just be blown away how much easier it is to get into the next property once you've already got one, because they go up in value, providing you buy in the right area. If you got $1 million of property and it's going up at 6.8% per year, that's $68,000 a year. Good luck trying to make another $68,000 a year in your job. I mean, if you've got a business, it's still hard to do. This way of building wealth through property is amazing, and the way that you can leverage it is just, second to none. It doesn't provide you with great cash flow from a week-to-week basis. It doesn't. That's not the plan. That's not the reason why we buy residential property. Residential property is to build up a big asset base, get you millions and millions of dollars, and then once you have that, you either continue to rent what you've got, or you sell it down, move it into a different asset class, whether it be commercial property or shares or something similar that provides better cash flow. But you need to have a good chunk to put into those assets first to be able to get the cash flow that you need out to actually be able to retire without relying on the pension. The other thing that I would recommend doing too is, especially I find with the male population, the amount of crap that we have lying around in our sheds often, it can be thousands and thousands of dollars. Chuck it on Marketplace, guys. Clean it out. Ladies too, clothes. I've seen some instances where people have got thousands and thousands of dollars for their old clothes. But yeah, look, just a good clean out, you should be healthy when you're doing this, so you got a bit more time. You should be clear-headed. Just knuckle down for a couple of years, get that money together, get that first deposit. It'll change the way that you retire. Delayed gratification is one of these things where it's going to be different for everybody, right? You need to balance what you want to do right now and balance what you want to do in the future. You only live once. That's something that I hear a lot. Yes, you do, but you part of that life is actually when you're older. So having some delayed gratification to make sure that your life is good in the future is pretty important. Just to say you only live once, meaning that you just want to live in the moment now, but you're spending every single dime that you've got at the pub or in the pokies on the weekend. Yeah, you do only live once, and it might be good for the next freaking day, but it won't be good in the future. So, get a bit smarter about it. Put some money away, invest some money, and your one life that you have will be better across the board. It's called delayed gratification. All right, guys, so I think that's going to wrap up episode number 1. I'm hoping that you guys got something out of that. I'm hoping that the reason why we invest in residential property is enough for you to take some sacrifice, to possibly, cut back on some of the spending that you're doing on the weekend, to possibly pack up the big house that you're living in or pack up the studio that you're living in and go and move in with a friend. It might be that push that you need to get a roommate in. But guys, if you've got a plan, you understand where you're going with it, I can promise you that buying property over a long enough period of time will be one of the best decisions that you ever made in your life. As long as you're doing something to invest, it can be the share market, It can be in bonds, but if you can get into residential property, that's my asset class of choice when it comes to building wealth, to building a lot of capital early on in your life. Until next time, guys, that's the first episode of the Evidence-Based Investing Podcast. I'm really, really excited to see you again for episode number 2.